From Evoke Media, I'm Sabrina Mirage Naeem. With me is Cassia Binkowski, and this is Breaking Glass, a series of conversations with women around the world who are shattering glass ceilings and challenging social norms. They are audacious, gutsy, and their stories are echoed across borders and generations in a rallying cry that is changing the narrative for women everywhere. Robert Ignell is Vice Chancellor of the Swedish Defense University. Over the course of his career, he studied civil-military relations, counterinsurgency operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, peace support operations, and so much more. But what we're especially excited to explore today is his vast knowledge of women in combat and gender in the military.
That's right, Sabrina. In 2019, Robert co-authored and edited a book specifically comparing gender perspectives in the military all around the world. That's what we dissect together today. And I just want to acknowledge for a second the elephant in the room. Robert is not our typical guest. On Breaking Glass, we pride ourselves on having hard and intimate conversations about complex women's issues, and those are usually with women. But it's important to acknowledge that there are men doing this work too, men who are advocates, men who are showing up to help change the narrative for women. Robert is one of those guests.
Absolutely. And we challenge Robert today to answer questions about his privilege, about how being a white male has enabled him access and opportunity that maybe has not been afforded to his female colleagues working in the same space. This conversation pulls back the curtain on this and so much more, and we're very excited to share his work with you. Take a listen. All right, Robert, thank you so much for joining us from Stockholm today. We're so excited to talk about an issue which, frankly, I don't know that much about, but I think is an important issue to talk about. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So jumping right in, today you are the Vice Chancellor of the Swedish Defense University and a Senior Fellow with the Security Studies Program at Georgetown University. So you're an academic, you're studying, you're, writing papers, doing research, you are publishing books on a whole slew of issues as it relates to the military and even militaries around the world. But one area that we really want to focus on is your research on women in combat and gender in the military. But first, I'd like to understand a little bit your path into the military. Take us back to the beginning. What was your path into the military? What did it look like?
Well, back in the day, I did my conscription year, as all male youth did back then. I also did a year at the Officers Academy and became a reserve officer, and then also did a tour while at university. I took a year's leave and went to Kosovo in '99 with the Swedish peacekeeping battalion there. And I'm still a reserve officer, although not a very active one. But I after Kosovo, I pursued my academic career, and I've been doing that since. And it's just a happy coincidence that I've managed to merge the two worlds by becoming the Vice Chancellor for the Swedish Defense University.
What did you see over the course of your career that really began to shape your perspective and your interest in gender dynamics in the military? Share more about what you know about what women are facing.
When I did my conscription, that was one of the very first years that women who were not pursuing an officer's career were allowed to do their military service. And they stood out, and it was tough. And it was completely integrated at that time, which meant gender blind. So everyone was just assumed to do the exact same things. We shared the same accommodations, the same toilets, the same showers. There were no shower curtains, and I think that was tough for everyone. It's not that easy to be a 19-year-old young man in that context either. It might sound like a dream, but if you're not prepared for it, it's actually quite tough. And it's been quite a cultural journey for the Swedish Armed Forces as well. Integrating women and introducing different ways of teaching young cadets, for example, the language you use, thinking about being more inclusive. And it's been a long journey, but the Swedish Armed Forces have come quite a long way.
And was that an intentional approach at the time? I mean, you say that they were gender blind, no separate accommodations, no shower curtains. Was that the belief that that would be the right path, or was it that they were not prepared to accommodate women at the time?
I think it was a little bit of both. But the idea, I think, was that if war happens, there's no way to accommodate those types of different needs. So this is a way to prepare them for reality. Obviously, there are ways to accommodate, even in the worst of circumstances. But that was the idea back then, at least.
How has that evolved?
What was then gender blind has become much more gender sensitive and gender aware. I think it was in the early 2000s that a really interesting project started. It was after UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. The integration of these perspectives really took hold in the Swedish Armed Forces, and a project started working on this, how to integrate gender approaches in the armed forces, how to become more inclusive, to recruit more women. And that was a tough journey, I think, but it's been quite successful.
So let's talk about that for a second, the integration, because for so many cultures, the soldier has forever been had been a sort of epitome of masculinity, the archetype, if you will. How has that influenced the introduction and integration of women?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And if you ask almost anyone, what does the typical soldier look like, or the typical Marine, or what have you, most people get that image of a well-built young male with a crew haircut and a broad jaw. And that starting point is really quite problematic for women joining the armed forces, because most of them do not look like that. And most of the cultural signifiers at the regiment, or the language you use, they are coded in a language, in a way that is construed for male and for masculinity. And to be part of that environment is tough. To stand out and be different, even though you desperately want to fit in, you're always going to stand out as a woman in the armed forces, unless we achieve much better rates of women in the armed forces. So I think that's been an enormous hurdle. Some women thrive in this environment, and they join because the environment looks this way. But those are very few, and most do need some consideration, at least, and some changes to the internal culture in order to feel welcome, and for the glass ceilings not to be quite as rough.
So let's talk about the Swedish military for a second, which is obviously at the heart of your expertise, although you've done an incredible amount of international study. We understand that today Sweden is a real leader internationally in terms of gender equity in the military. I hear you that it started with this gender blind approach. Paint a picture, if you will, for where it is at today. What does it look like? What is the breakdown? And what kind of policies and changes have gotten you there?
So Sweden is actually a really interesting case, because it's a bit of a failure at the same time. The number of women in the Swedish armed forces are still very few, although we are now recruiting at between 15 and 20%. The officer corps is just over 5%, which is much lower than most OECD countries or Western countries. So in terms of recruitment and retention, it hasn't been that successful. But on the other hand, the cultural shift is where the